The chains had fallen behind her, but men on horseback were closing in fast. Every branch that snapped under her feet could reveal her. Dogs were barking, voices shouting. She had only one choice: run or be captured forever. Every second in the dark forest could mean life or death.
A knock in the dark. The knock came again. 3 slow knocks, a pause, then 2 more. Not the violent pounding of slave catchers, not the careless banging of drunk hunters. This was controlled, intentional. Inside the cabin, silence swallowed the room. The older man raised his hand, signaling her to stay back. The woman quietly moved toward the fire, dimming the flame until the room was barely lit. Her heart pounded so loudly she feared whoever stood outside could hear it. If it was the hunters, this was the end. If it was someone else, that might be worse. The older man stepped toward the door slowly. He didn't open it right away. Instead, he spoke through the wood. "Who walks at this hour?" A voice answered softly from outside. "Friends of the north wind." The older man relaxed slightly. He opened the door just enough to reveal a tall figure cloaked in dark fabric. Only one person, no horses, no dogs, but his eyes were sharp, observant. He stepped inside quickly, shutting the door behind him. "They're sweeping south again," the stranger said. "They lost her scent at river." Her breath caught. They were still hunting, still searching, still angry. The network. The stranger's eyes landed on her. For a long moment he studied her face, the dirt, the exhaustion, the quiet fire in her eyes. "You crossed the river alone?" he asked. She nodded. A faint hint of respect flickered across his face. "That bought you time, but not safety." The older man motioned for everyone to sit. "There's a route," the stranger continued. "North, 2 nights from here, hidden stops along the way, safe houses." She listened carefully. Safe houses, plural. This wasn't luck. This was organized. A network. People risking their lives to move others towards freedom. But networks could break. Trust could be betrayed. And hunters paid well for information. The truth about the North. The stranger leaned closer to her. "You must understand something," he said quietly. "The forest is only the first test. North doesn't mean easy. It means harder." Harder? She had crossed rivers, outrun dogs, survived the cold. What could be harder than that? "The closer you get," he continued, "the more desperate they become." Desperate men were dangerous. Her jaw tightened. "I'll keep going," she said softly. Her voice was hoarse but steady. The stranger nodded once. "Good, because tomorrow night you move." A new fear. She barely slept. Even with a roof above her, fear wrapped around her like chains that hadn't fully fallen away. What if someone betrayed them? What if the knock next time wasn't friendly? At dawn, the stranger was gone. No goodbye, no sound, just vanished. That unsettled her. Invisible helpers meant invisible enemies, too. The plan. As darkness approached again, the older man handed her a small cloth bundle. Inside, dried food, a small knife, and a folded scrap of paper. "Don't open it unless you're alone," he warned. The woman hugged her tightly. "You're stronger than you think," she whispered. Stronger. She didn't feel strong. She felt hunted. But she stepped back into the forest anyway. Moving in shadows. The night felt heavier now. Every sound seemed sharper. She followed the hidden path behind the cabin, careful to step where leaves were thickest to avoid tracks. The forest wasn't random anymore. It had direction, purpose. After hours of walking, she saw it. A lantern, low to the ground, flickering once, then twice. A signal. Her pulse quickened. This must be the next stop. But what if it wasn't? What if hunters had learned the signals? She crouched low, watching from a distance. Only one figure stood near the lantern. A woman, alone. No horses, no weapons visible. Still, danger doesn't always show its teeth. The test. As she stepped closer, the woman spoke first. "Where does the river bend?" It wasn't a normal question. Her mind raced. Then she remembered the folded paper. She quickly moved behind a tree and opened it. 3 words were written. "Where the trees kneel." She stepped back out. "Where the trees kneel," she answered. The woman's shoulders relaxed. "You're expected," she said softly. Expected. Someone had planned her escape before she even ran. That realization shook her. She wasn't alone in this. But not everyone can be trusted. Inside the second safe house, things felt different, quieter, more tense. The woman offered her water but kept glancing toward the window. "You must leave before dawn," she said quickly. "There are rumors." "Rumors?" she asked. "Someone is selling information." The words hit like ice. Selling information. That meant betrayal. That meant someone within the network could be feeding Hunter's directions. Her chest tightened. Freedom suddenly felt fragile again. The sound that changes everything. Just as she began to rest, hooves. Close, too close. The woman's face drained of color. "They weren't supposed to be this far north," she whispered. A shout echoed outside. A dog barked sharply. Her blood turned cold. They were here, and this time they were ahead of schedule. The woman grabbed her arm urgently. "There's a trapdoor under the rug." Her heart slammed against her ribs. Not again. Not hiding. Not suffocating in darkness while men searched above her. But there was no choice. As she moved toward the trapdoor, the cabin door exploded open. Boots thundered inside. A voice growled, "We know she's here." And this time, they sounded certain. The night refused to end, and every second felt heavier than the last. Hidden beneath the wooden floor, she lay perfectly still, forcing herself not to breathe too loudly. Above her, footsteps moved slowly across the room, deliberate, searching, patient. They knew she was close. They could feel it, and so could she. Dust fell through the cracks as the men walked overhead. Each sound sent fear rushing through her body. But fear was no longer new to her. Fear had become familiar, almost predictable. What terrified her now was the silence between the footsteps, the moments when everything stopped, and she wondered if they had heard her heart pounding beneath them. She pressed her hand against her mouth, trying to calm herself. She had come too far to be caught now. Every step she had taken, every risk she had accepted, had led to this moment. Freedom was close enough to imagine, yet still far enough to be taken away in an instant. The door slammed open again. Angry voices filled the room. They were frustrated, confused. A slave was not supposed to disappear. A slave was not supposed to fight back, to think, to run. But she had done all of that. And now her courage had turned her into something dangerous in their eyes, someone who refused to remain invisible. One of the men stopped walking. The floor creaked above her head. She froze completely, her muscles burning from the effort of staying still. The air felt thin. Time slowed. She could hear the man shifting his weight, as if deciding where to search next. For a moment, she was certain it was over. But then the footsteps moved away. She didn't move immediately. She couldn't. Her body refused to believe she was safe, even for a moment. Minutes passed before the voices faded and the door finally closed again. Only then did she allow herself to breathe, slowly, quietly, carefully. Survival had taught her patience. Moving too soon could mean losing everything. When she finally crawled out from beneath the floor, the room felt different. The danger hadn't disappeared, but something inside her had changed. She realized that fear no longer controlled her the way it once had. Every attempt to break her instead made her stronger. Every punishment had taught her endurance, and every step toward freedom had reminded her that her life belonged to her, not to those who claimed ownership over it. Outside, the night air was cold, sharp against her skin. She wrapped her arms around herself and looked into the darkness ahead.
The road forward was uncertain. There would be more danger, more hiding, more running. Freedom was not a single moment. It was a journey filled with risk. But for the first time, hope felt stronger than fear. She moved quietly through the shadows, guided by instinct and determination. Somewhere beyond the darkness was a place where she could exist without chains, without fear of being hunted. A place where learning, thinking, and dreaming were not crimes. And that belief pushed her forward, step by step. Behind her, the world she had known was already searching, already angry, already determined to bring her back. But they no longer understood her. She was no longer the person they thought they controlled. She had discovered something they could never take away, the knowledge that freedom begins in the mind long before it is reached by the body. And once a person learns that truth, there is no turning back. The night swallowed her footsteps as she disappeared into the distance, carrying nothing but courage and the unshakable belief that her story was not meant to end in silence. It was meant to be told. And every step she took into the unknown was a step closer to a future she had dared to imagine, even when the world told her she had no right to dream. Because sometimes the greatest act of resistance is simply refusing to give up.
Branches scratched against her arms as she moved forward, careful not to make too much noise. Every sound felt louder in the darkness: the snap of a twig, the rustling of leaves, the distant cry of night animals. To anyone else, it might have sounded ordinary, but to her, every sound carried danger. She knew they would not stop searching. By morning, riders would spread out across the roads and fields. Dogs would follow her scent. Posters might be nailed to wooden posts, describing her as property that had been stolen. Not as a person, not as a girl with dreams and fears, just something to be returned. But she refused to think of herself that way anymore. The cold air filled her lungs as she kept walking, guided only by the faint light of the moon. She had learned to move quietly, to step where the ground was soft, to avoid open spaces where she could be seen. Survival had become instinct. Every decision mattered now. Hours passed, though it felt like time no longer existed. Hunger gnawed at her stomach, and exhaustion pulled at her legs. Still, she didn't stop. Stopping meant thinking, and thinking brought fear. Moving forward was the only way to stay strong. At dawn, the sky slowly turned gray. She found a hollow between fallen trees and hid herself beneath leaves and branches. Sleep came in short, restless moments. Every noise woke her instantly. Even in exhaustion, her mind refused to relax. She dreamed of being caught, hands grabbing her arms, chains closing again around her wrists, the sound of laughter from men who believed escape was foolish. She woke suddenly, breathing hard, her heart racing. For a moment she didn't know where she was. Then the silence of the forest reminded her she was still free. For now. The realization brought both comfort and fear. Freedom meant responsibility. There was no one to protect her, no place to return to. Every choice she made would decide whether she survived or disappeared. As the sun rose higher, the forest came alive with sound. Birds moved through the trees, wind whispered through the leaves. The world continued as if nothing had changed, as if her struggle meant nothing. And yet, for her, everything had changed. She thought about the people she had left behind, others who dreamed of escape but never tried. Some were too afraid, others had lost hope long ago. She understood them now. Hope was dangerous. Hope made you risk everything. But hope was also the reason she was still moving. By afternoon, thirst forced her to search for water. She followed the sound of a small stream, kneeling beside it carefully. The cold water burned her throat as she drank, but it gave her strength. For a brief moment, she allowed herself to rest. That was when she heard it. Distant voices. Her body froze instantly. The sound carried through the trees, faint but unmistakable. Men calling to each other, searching, closer than she expected. Panic tried to rise inside her, but she forced it down. Panic made mistakes. Mistakes got people caught.
She moved away from the water quickly, stepping into thicker brush, using the trees as cover. Her heart pounded as the voices grew louder. She could hear dogs barking now. They were tracking her. The realization sent a chill through her entire body. She began moving faster, ignoring the pain in her feet. Branches tore at her clothes, but she didn't stop. The forest that had once felt like protection now felt like a maze with no exit. The barking grew closer. She spotted a fallen tree ahead and climbed over it, then doubled back through a patch of mud, hoping to confuse the dogs. She had heard stories about others who escaped, stories whispered quietly at night, tricks to survive, tricks to disappear. Now those stories were saving her life. Minutes felt like hours as she pushed forward. Finally, the voices began to fade again. The barking grew distant. She didn't know if it was luck or instinct, but somehow she had slipped away once more. When she finally stopped, her legs gave out beneath her. She sank to the ground, breathing heavily, tears mixing with dirt on her face. Not tears of weakness, tears of release. She was still alive, and every time she survived, her belief grew stronger. They could chase her, they could hunt her, but they could not break her spirit anymore. As evening approached, the sky turned gold between the trees. She watched the light fade, realizing how far she had come. The girl who once obeyed every order without question was gone. In her place stood someone stronger, someone who understood that freedom required courage every single day. The journey was far from over. Ahead lay uncertainty, hunger, and danger she could not yet see. But behind her was something even worse, a life without choice, without voice, without hope, and she would never return to that life again. As darkness settled once more, she stood up and continued walking north, guided by nothing but determination and the quiet belief that somewhere ahead freedom was waiting, and this time she intended to reach it.
Night returned quickly in the forest. Darkness swallowed the last pieces of sunlight, and with it came silence, the kind that made every thought louder. She walked slowly now, her body exhausted but her mind refusing to surrender. Each step forward felt heavier than the last, yet stopping was no longer an option. She understood something now that she hadn't before. Escape wasn't a single moment. It was a decision she had to make again and again, every hour, every mile, every breath. The forest air grew colder as the night deepened. Mist began to settle between the trees, turning shadows into moving shapes. More than once she turned suddenly, convinced someone was behind her, but there was nothing, only wind, only fear trying to take control. Fear had followed her from the beginning, but now it no longer ruled her. She remembered the first night she decided to run, the whispers, the warnings, the stories of those who tried and never returned. She had been terrified then, unsure if freedom even existed beyond the places she knew. Now she knew it did, because she had felt it, in the open air, in the sound of her own footsteps choosing their own direction, in the simple act of moving without permission. Still, freedom came with a cost. Her feet were blistered and bleeding. Hunger made her dizzy. Every muscle in her body ached. She hadn't slept properly in days. Sometimes the world around her seemed to blur, as if exhaustion itself was trying to pull her down. She leaned against a tree, closing her eyes for only a moment. Images filled her mind instantly, memories she couldn't escape, faces of people left behind, quiet voices at night sharing dreams they believed would never come true. She wondered if they would ever know she made it this far, or if they would only hear that she disappeared. The thought hurt more than the physical pain. She pushed herself forward again. Hours later, the forest began to change. The trees grew thinner, the ground less crowded with roots and fallen branches. Somewhere ahead she could hear water moving, stronger than a stream, a river. Hope sparked inside her chest. A river could help her lose the trail. Water confused scent. It could slow the men chasing her, but reaching it meant crossing open ground, and open ground meant risk. She waited at the edge of the trees, watching carefully. The moon reflected off the moving water, lighting the area just enough to reveal danger. Every shadow looked alive. Every movement felt like a warning.
Her heart pounded. Then she ran. Cold air rushed past her as she crossed the open space. Each second felt endless. She expected to hear shouting, gunshots, dogs barking, but the night remained silent. When she reached the river, she dropped to her knees, breathing hard. The water was freezing as she stepped into it, the cold cutting through her pain. She moved along the shallow edge, letting the current carry away her tracks before climbing out again farther downstream. For the first time since escaping, she allowed herself a small smile. She was learning, not just how to survive, but how to outthink those chasing her. The realization gave her strength she didn't know she still had. But the night wasn't finished testing her. Clouds slowly covered the moon, and darkness became complete. Without light, every step became uncertain. She stumbled more than once, catching herself before falling. The forest felt different now, heavier, as if watching her. And then she heard it again, a distant horn. Not close, but not far enough. They were still searching. The sound reminded her of something important. This journey would not end quickly. Freedom was not waiting just beyond the next hill. It was far away, hidden behind days, maybe weeks of struggle. For a moment, doubt returned. Could she really make it? The question lingered in her mind as she walked. Her body begged for rest. Her thoughts whispered that turning back would end the pain, that surrender would be easier. She stopped walking. The forest stood silent around her. Slowly, she lifted her head and looked ahead into the darkness, and in that moment, something inside her changed. She realized that even if the journey killed her, going back would destroy her. Freedom was no longer just escape. It was who she had become. She took another step forward, then another. The fear was still there. The danger was real, but so was her determination. Every mile she survived made her stronger, harder to break, harder to catch. Behind her were chains. Ahead of her was uncertainty, and she chose uncertainty. As dawn began to approach once more, faint light appeared between the trees. She climbed a small ridge and stopped at the top, looking out at the endless land ahead. Somewhere beyond that horizon was a place where no one owned her name, where no one decided her future. She didn't know how long it would take to get there, but she knew she would keep moving until she did. Because now, she wasn't just running for her life, she was running toward it.